know what this is, but I'm really comfortable one-on-one, and I'm comfortable in a large group of anonymous, like there's no, in front of a stage. But this group is 10 people, of half of which I already know. So it feels very different than usual. But I kind of feel like I'm working on some new stuff for talks, and I thought it was appropriate among friends to tell some of those stories. So we'll see. Hopefully that's a good idea.
Well, listen, I am recording this because I know that people will want to refer back. You'll want to go back and watch it, I'm sure.
Me?
Yeah.
I will not. I'll try to, I usually record my screen on my side, but it's pretty rare that I can stomach going back and actually scrubbing through something like that, but we'll see.
Well, let's ease into this. I am recording this. We've got a variety of different kinds of folks on the call. And I'm going to ask them all to here. I'm actually going to mute you guys. Let's see. Let me get that done. We have creatives, we have entrepreneurs, we have at least one accountant, nonprofits. It's a mixed bag.
Cool.
One of the things I want to just do a little commercial for is that we're encouraging people to think local this season above all else, as we have businesses that have been impacted by the pandemic, and our downtown retailers, and actually all of our retailers in town, whether they be big box stores, franchises, independents, and also our hospitality sector has really been hit hard. So we're just asking everybody to do what they can do to put a portion of their holiday spend locally, and not just click on Amazon. Although if you're going to click on Amazon, buy the Creative Pep Talk book from me. So think local, and like our Think Local Columbus page on Instagram and Facebook, and go check out our new website, thinklocalcolumbus.com, and do your small part to help ensure that our businesses are still here when we emerge from the pandemic. We are fortunate to have a sponsor, Old National Bank. We really appreciate their support. Our sponsors have been fantastic this year, and they've even hung with us when events we had planned to do in person disappeared altogether. So we're really grateful to our sponsors. We're here on Friday the 13th of 2020. What could possibly go wrong? It's going to be great. And we're here with Andy Miller, who goes by the name Andy J. Pizza. He's going to tell us why. He has Columbus, Indiana roots. He went to Columbus North High School, although he now lives in Columbus, Ohio. He's a freelance designer and illustrator for nearly 13 years. Now he's expanded into public speaking and podcasting. And normally his illustrations are color drenched. The one behind you, not so much. He's the founder of Creative Pep Talk podcast. He has written a book, Creative Pep Talk. He did his studies in Huddersfield in the UK. He's animated. He types in all caps. He's got 3 beautiful kids, and I could not be more excited that you're here. Thank you for giving us an hour of your time.
Absolutely. I'm super thrilled to be here, and I'm glad we could make this work. I'm glad you asked me to do it. I feel kind of a little bit emotional because when I was thinking about all this, I was thinking about how I knew there would be people on the call because I knew Cindy would be here, but possibly other people that probably believed in me to some degree before I believed in myself. And, as cliche as that might sound, it was actually true. And I think those people just stick out to you, whether they're teachers or colleagues or friends or whatever. And so it's just super cool we actually were scheduled to, I was scheduled to come talk with the Arts Council this fall. So in lieu of that, I guess we're doing this, but I'm excited. And this is really, I'm excited to do this. And so, okay, so here's what I'm going to do. It's probably going to be slightly unexpected for an illustrator to approach a talk this way or a conversation. But part of it is, so what I want to do is I want to show you some of my work just a little bit, but partially because it's a virtual thing and I hate the technology of sharing screens back and forth. And it always just totally distracts me. And usually there's a bunch of technical problems. I'll share my screen for a little bit. I'll show you some of my stuff. But then I just want to tell you some stories. And, part of that is that's just what I like to do. Part of that is knowing that there's a whole different group of people here that aren't artists and really my podcast and what I'm all about, the stories I tell are about leaning into what makes you weird, finding yourself, neurodiversity, all that kind of stuff. And, my podcast, I started it kind of like about illustration and design, but then it became kind of about creative careers. And then at some point, I think I realized that it was just as much about creative careers as it was approaching career in a creative way. And I realized I have all these things in common with entrepreneurs and, freelancers and just everybody that needs to approach career creatively for them to thrive. And I think increasingly that has become the case for a lot of people as the economy changes. Yeah, I know a lot about the economy. We'll get into that. I don't. Anyway, yeah. So that's what we're going to do. I'll share my screen for a second and I will show you a little bit of my work. My website is incredibly outdated. But I'll get to that at some point. And then I'll show you some stuff on Instagram and then I'll tell you a few stories. So that's what we'll do.
Great.
Here's the part I don't like sharing my screen. It's just, there's something about it that's just discombobulating for me. Okay. You guys all see that? Give me some kind of visual. Yeah. All right. Okay. We're working with it. All right. So this is my website. It'll do just fine. I'm an illustrator. Like City said, I do public speaking and podcasting now too. I think of myself as an illustrator, but I feel like I'm just as passionate about illustrating with words as I am with pictures. And I feel like to me, there's kind of a base foundation of just wanting to communicate and wanting to kind of illuminate a point, whether that's an illustration that's drawn or that's an illustration that's an analogy or a metaphor or whatever. So this is my visual work. I've worked with some fancy clients. Somehow I got that one in. I worked with the New York Times once. They can't take it away from me. So I've got that. People like YouTube, Warby Parker. This is my first kids book. I've got a few more kids books coming out in the new year. Amazon, blah, 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 bunch of stuff. This is kind of what it looks like. And I will say one thing that I'm kind of bitter about. I know this is being recorded, but I did just do a job for Apple, even though after which I was told that I'm not allowed to put the work in my portfolio, which makes me feel like the kid at school that was like, I've got a girlfriend. She's in Canada. Okay. I promise you I worked with Apple. I can't show you what it looks like, but I did. And so that's a personal grievance. So yeah, that's kind of my work. And it's changed a little bit. A lot of the stuff I'm doing now has a little bit more analog vibe. I've been doing a lot of painting and stuff like that. And part of that I think is just about, the how, the style kind of matching the tone of the what and the why. And a lot of the things I'm telling are more personal and they're more idea focused. And so the kind of digital slick stuff doesn't match the tone of, I'm always telling people like when you're working on your creative portfolio, there should be kind of a synonymous feeling of when someone meets you versus someone looking at your portfolio. So sometimes when I'm working with creatives, if I look at their portfolio and then later meet them. And I'm like, these are two completely different things. I'm like, you got to bridge that gap. That's a big part of like finding your voice and finding yourself as a creative person. And so anyway, this is kind of some of the more recent stuff that I've been making. This is the new calendar, which I'm told is going to arrive today. This is a beer can that we did.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I'm super pumped about it. This kind of is, this is kind of embodies this idea that I always think about, which is getting high on your own supply, which just means not literally like getting drunk on these beers. I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying, like, I always try to make like this mural. That's the mural that I want to see every day. And this t-shirt, this is the t-shirt that I want to wear every day. That's the kind of work I want to make, is the stuff that I actually want to consume. When I made that beer label, I just wanted to make something that I wanted to hold in my hands. Like if I looked at the shelf and there was a bunch of beers, I tried to make the one that would be most appealing to me. So yeah, here's a bunch of stuff, but the thing that I probably am most known for now isn't the client work. It's not, the commercial illustration. It's probably more my stories. And, sometimes that looks like these kind of little sliders that I do. They're kind of like comics where I'm telling personal stories and illustrating some kind of idea. But often it just looks like me telling stories. And so I'm going to stop the horrible screen sharing for a minute. And I'm just going to tell you a few stories. And so let me grab something real quick. Then we'll be off to the races. Okay.
Because I have a whole lot of questions for you.
Oh, you do? Okay. Well, I'll try not to blabber on. I've got four stories, and it's really just all about neurodiversity. And I don't know if anybody here has heard that term. It's kind of a new term that's floating about, but the idea is that everybody's brain chemistry is different. And I have this strong passion for encouraging people to lean into that neurodiversity instead of trying to diminish it. I have ADHD. I have a very strong suspicion that I got that from my mom. And I just watched her my whole childhood. She taught me kind of what not to do, because she tried to be a normal person, even though she clearly was not. She tried to be a secretary. She tried to be a waitress. She tried to be a stay-at-home mom, all of which she just could not stomach. She couldn't do it. And so at an early age, something like 18, I knew, like, if I'm going to succeed whatsoever, I'm going to have to bet on this weird stuff that I do and this weird part of who I am. And so a lot of people, when they say neurodiverse, they're talking about people, on the autistic spectrum, or people with ADHD, or people with dyslexia or dyspraxia, or, all the disses, every way that we can diss those people. And when I think about it, I just think about neurodiversity as everybody's brain is totally different. The thing that is in your head is, unique in all the universe. And it is the most complex machine in the known universe. And that's in your head. And if you're not leaning into what's unique about that thing, you're missing so many opportunities. So anyway, that's kind of, I just want to tell a few stories that I think they're mostly just stories of dumb stuff that I've done that I think highlight some of the ideas around neurodiversity that really matter to me. Okay. So when I was really little, I thought that I was not raised by my mom. I was raised by my dad and my stepmom, and they're like corporate people. The system works really well for them. And I didn't think for certain that they were aliens, but I thought it was definitely in the realm of possibility. I remember like laying in my bed when I was 7 and just thinking that they probably have a device that means when I walk down the hall to get a drink, they just instantly turn back into their human form. But they're actually sat there in the living room with like giant tentacles and like all this crazy stuff. And I thought it's probably not true, but it definitely could be true. And I just remember having this sense of like, man, I'm weird, I'm different. And then later I got diagnosed with ADHD, but not only as an adult. and realize like, oh yeah, I am actually different. But I feel like probably everybody here had a sense a little bit that your parents were aliens. And I think that's part of like just the human experience, because we all show up to this planet completely different than anything it's ever seen. And it's not tailored to us. It's not designed to us. We are an alien in one way or another. And so I feel like everybody can kind of relate to that, whether you have ADHD or not. And I encourage people to really lean into that and crystallize that. You know, I'm an artist, which means being weird for a living. But even I forget all the time to let that true being out. Like, it's easy as an ADHD person. You know, one thing I do is I always choose kind of, I paint my fingernails, and I have a bunch of weird glasses. Sometimes I dye my hair, all this stuff. And part of that is kind of not letting myself try to pass as normal, not trying to pass as neurotypical, because there's always a temptation to suppress who you really are and just get by under the radar, go unnoticed. And so even even as an artist, even with all that stuff, I find myself all the time going into these places where I'm trying to not be me. And I had this phone call with this person who was interviewing me about ADHD. And so it was all out in the open. And I just thought, okay, she already knows the truth. I might as well just let all the weirdness fly. And I felt so comfortable. And I was just being myself in such a way that I was like, whoa, man, I actually forgot what it feels like to really be myself. I didn't even realize how much I was suppressing my nature and my antics and my, whatever this stuff is. And if I think if someone like me can do that, all of us need to take time to remember who we are and find places where you can do that comfortably. So a few years ago, my grandma died, and a few months after that, I was driving to go visit my Aunt Sandy. I'm a good Midwestern boy, so I have two Aunt Sandys, one on both sides. And I was going to see, my family was going to go visit my Aunt Sandy, and she called me on the way there, and she's like, "Oh man, I forgot to tell you. There's actually, my church is holding a memorial for Grandma today. Do you mind going to that instead of hanging out in the house?" And I'm like, I don't understand how you didn't know that. But I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to say no to that. And she's like, yeah, it's going to be great. We're going to release some butterflies, and it'll be a special thing for Grandma. And I was like, I have so many questions about who's holding these butterflies. Are they aware that damages their wings? I was very anxious about the whole thing, but I was like, all right, I'll do it. I can't say no. It's for Grandma. So I went there, dropped off the kids at the shelter. It was an outdoor thing. And then as I'm walking over to the shelter, I have this huge panic overtake me. And I jump in the bushes and I just start ripping my shirt off. And I'll explain why I was half naked at the memorial. It wasn't that I was wearing a t-shirt. It was an informal kind of event. It was an outdoor kind of thing. The problem was the t-shirt that I was wearing. And so the t-shirt that I was wearing was not appropriate for this memorial. And I'll give you, there's a few layers of why it was so inappropriate. The first layer was it has a huge slice of pizza on it. Now, as far as memorial attire goes, that's not terrible. It's not a deal breaker. It's okay. It's very me. People expect, Andy J Pizza or whatever to wear a pizza shirt. But the problem really starts, the second layer is what's holding the t-shirt is a disembodied skeleton arm. And I don't know if you pick up on that. That's not what you want to wear in a memorial, but it gets worse than that. Behind the skeleton arm is a gravestone. And the gravestone reads, "Rest in pizza." And so I just flipped my shirt inside out. It was totally obscured, and I was fine. And the memorial was great. And we released butterflies, and it was real weird. But I bring that up because in that moment, I think it was totally fine. No matter, even though that t-shirt is so me, it's very my essence on a t-shirt, and it's my favorite. It's my golden boy. I wear it first thing out of the wash. I think everybody here can agree I did the right thing by flipping that inside out, by respecting the situation. And it's okay on occasion to turn down your you-ness. You don't have to be your full self in every setting. I get that. But the problem is, growing up, when I would go to school, when I remember going to kindergarten, I would go into that setting with all this like hyperactivity, and the teacher would be like, "Can you just flip that inside out? Could you just that metaphorical t-shirt? Could you just turn that around?" And I'm like, okay, I'm a reasonable person. I can do that. Won't be my full self in this setting. Totally fine. But then it happens at dinner table. And then it happens at bedtime. And then it happens at Sunday school. And then it happens at work when you grow up. And then over and over, you're flipping. And eventually you get sick of jumping behind the bush half naked. And you just think, I'm going to start the day, get my shirt, and just flip it inside out before I even put it on. Because why? Let's just save the time. And if you're not careful, eventually you're just folding your t-shirts inside out in the drawer. And that's what happened to me. That's what I realized when I'm on that phone call, this ADHD interview, is like, man, I forgot what it felt like to wear myself right side out. And so the first thing that I just wanted to share with you is never cut out your tags. That's the first thing. Don't cut out your tags. You cut out your tags, you're going to forget that yourself is supposed to be worn the right side out. So that's the first thing. And so, okay, I have two more stories, I think. That's my pizza shirt story. And it's about embracing your je ne sais quoi and embracing your full self. And I think everybody loves that. Sounds great, right? Like, who doesn't want to own your strengths? It's fantastic. But I think that being yourself is kind of like a mid-century stereo, like the volume knob. It doesn't have the equalizer. It doesn't have all the settings. When you turn up your strengths, you are going to turn up your weaknesses. It's really hard to, like, sometimes, they're like, for instance, I'll give you a vulnerable example of this. I do interviews on the podcast. Mostly my podcast is a monologue, but, I do interviews. And one of the problems is, as someone with ADHD, if you go look up ADHD symptoms, like number 3 is interrupts people. It's really freaking hard for me not to interrupt people. There's just a whole bunch of reasons why that is when you have ADHD. And so interviewing people is such a challenge. I love doing it, and I've gotten better at it, but I'll get emails. I got an email last week, 3 paragraphs of why, Andy, stop interrupting people. Good God. And I'm like, I have ADHD. Okay. And if I go into that interview turning down that all the way, I will not be myself. If the whole time I'm thinking, I gotta, mitigate all these weaknesses, I will not be able to be I'm not, it's not an excuse. I do try to get better at all these different things, but it's true. This is kind of, this kind of illustrates this idea. We did some renovations in our house last year, and we had to move the fridge out of the house to do the floors. The contractor was going to refinish the floors, and he kind of gave me the impression, and everybody I talked to kind of implied that if you have the right dolly, you can move a fridge pretty easily by yourself. Like, it's not actually that difficult to do that, even though it seems a little bit crazy. And so I was like, all right, I'll do that. And I hooked up the dolly to the fridge, and I started moving it. And as soon as I moved it, I thought, whoa, this thing is freakishly heavy. It feels dangerously heavy. I can't believe anybody does this on their own. Like, I feel like I'm going to hurt myself, but I was given the impression that I should be fine. And so I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to move it myself. And so I did successfully move it out my front door, down the front steps, and into my neighbor's garage. But it was it was intense and it felt really scary. That, after time passed, they did the floors, whatever. I got the foresight or whatever to not risk it again. And I told my contractor, could you and your guys just move that back in? I had kind of a hard time and I was kind of embarrassed because he'd given me the impression that it wasn't a big deal. I was kind of embarrassed to ask for help. And he's like, sure. And then after he moved it back inside, he came to me and he was like, yo, you should not have moved that fridge. I have moved thousands of fridges and yours is by far the heaviest. Like, you should have absolutely asked for help. And I was just really struck by how much of a badass I really was. Like, I didn't know I was so hardcore. That's not what I was struck by. What I was struck by was that, you'd never know if you have a heavier fridge. You never know what things you're dealing with that other people aren't dealing with. And just because you get the impression that you should be fine to cope with this thing, your weirdness, owning your weirdness is also about owning what you weirdly struggle with. A lot of people that follow my podcast know this because I talk about it a lot, but I take a bath every day. Sometimes two times a day. And I get that that's not really sustainable for everybody. If we're all taking baths all the time, it's not good for the water supply, all that kind of stuff. It's irresponsible, but I need those baths. And for the longest time, I just thought I'm weird. And, I thought it's a coincidence that my mom also used to take baths every day. But then I read that it's actually really effective for raising your dopamine, which is a deficiency for ADHD, a warm bath. And so it's me self-medicating. And so, yeah, not everybody should do that, but that's a little bit how my fridge is heavier. And I gotta own those things. So own your heavy fridge. Okay. Fridges. My favorite thing in a fridge is hummus, the beautiful bean frosting. And my favorite place to get hummus is at Aldi's. I don't think America really understands Aldi. I think they think it's lowbrow or whatever, but Aldi actually has amazing European delicacies. And it's owned by the same people. I have some people in the Zoom right now that are like, preach it. Aldi's amazing. I see you. And Aldi is amazing. And for me as a kid, it was like, well, what I was saying was you can get great hummus there. That's a tip. That's my biggest tip. They have good hummus. They got 4 compartments, everything. And when I was when I was growing up, my parents would always take me to normal places for groceries like Walmart and Kroger, and it was fine. But my grandma would take me to Aldi. And Aldi is a magical place. And my life changed in an Aldi. It wasn't just that the chips had the barbecue chips had a cowboy riding a chip on the front. It wasn't just, that they didn't have Mountain Dew, but they had, I think, was it Mountain Lightning? I could be wrong about that. But it was just a crazy, weird place. One of the parts of that magic is you got to bag your own groceries there. And I was a kid, which, is just, a bad person. And so I'm there and and my grandma's struggling to bag her groceries and I'm just trying to entertain myself. Now, we didn't have screens back then. All we had was right next to the groceries where you bag them is a mirror. And I was doing, I'm going to lose half of the people here, but anybody that likes Super Mario 64 remembers that at the start, there's like Mario's face and you can just manipulate his face and you can do that as long as you want. I did that more than play the game sometimes. And that's what I was doing. The old school original version of that. I'm trying to speak to the young people, just looking in a mirror and making faces. And so that's what I was doing. And so I'm looking at this mirror and I'm making faces. I'm getting carried away, as you probably wouldn't be surprised by. So much so that I smash my face into the glass of the mirror and I see something that completely transforms my entire paradigm. I see a mid-level grocery store manager, because it's not just a mirror, it's a two-way mirror. And from the other side, it's a window. And on the other side is a whole other world. It's like a 70s looking office that hasn't been updated in a long time with wood paneling and all that. Still remember it just like it was yesterday, because it blew my freaking mind. It was like, in like Wizard of Oz, where it goes from black and white to Technicolor, it was like 2D to 3D. Like my whole world was opening up, but it was bigger than that. It wasn't just 2D to 3D or 3D to 4D. This was 4D to all D. Right. All dimensions. That's why they call it that. I don't know if you know it, but it will blow your freaking mind. And what I saw, I remember seeing this and I started thinking like, what, things are not as they seem. And I would be in the bathroom and be like, is there a man on the other side of that window? Like, oh God. But it taught me a lesson. It taught me the lesson of things aren't what they seem. And when it comes to your faults, when it comes to your weaknesses, that is also true, because I have this friend, Meg Lewis. She's a designer and she's a comedian, and she also is someone who is always encouraging people to find their weird. And I asked her once on a podcast, I said, what's your first tip for helping people find what's different about them and leaning into that? And she said, start with your faults. Start with the things that you're self-conscious about. And the reason is because whatever sticks out about you, people are going to comment on. They're going to compliment you for those things, but they're also going to diss you. And the thing is that our brains are wired, for survival. They're not wired for thriving. And so the way that works is you forget almost every time anybody compliments you. It just goes, psh. You actually have to, it's like scientifically, you got to savor those if you want them to stick. But when somebody disses you, you hold on to that. You got a catalog of your disses right in the back of your mind at any time. And so those things that are different about you, the shortcut to finding them is, what are your faults? Now, Meg Lewis reminds me of another Meg. And this Meg is from one of my favorite books of all time, Wrinkle in Time. And Meg, the main character in that, she has this guide who gives her supernatural aid from time to time throughout the story. It's very trippy story. But one of the things this kind of guide witch person gives her, she says, I'm going to give you something to help you on your journey. To you, I'm giving your faults. And the reason she does that is because when Meg is later in a pickle fighting a bad guy and she's all discombobulated and strung out and, she's not in her right mind, she thinks, why did she give me my faults? And she knew that her faults would be top of mind, that she could reach for them instantly, just like all of us here. If I said, what is your fault? What's wrong with you? What are the things that you really struggle with? Why is your fridge heavier, basically? You could be like, boom, 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 boom. I can tell you all the reasons I'm terrible. And the fact of the matter is, one of her faults was she was impatient. And the opposite of impatient is efficient. She was angry. And within that anger was this desire for justice. And there's this quote from this astrophysicist, Niels Bohr, that said, the opposite of a profound truth might be another profound truth. And when it comes to your faults, that is so true. I remember starting out in illustration, and I had this art director tell me once, when I need someone to just fill a page, when I need something like completely not subtle, that's when I call you. Like I don't turn to Andy when I need something subtle. And I remember just thinking, oh man, like my work lacks subtlety. That sucks. I'm like not intellectual. I'm like, I'm crass. I'm like a pop star. That freaking sucks. But the opposite of subtle is attention grabbing. And a lot of advertisers love working with me for that reason. In fact, I have a strong suspicion that one of the reasons my podcast has took took off is because of the artwork. You know, Apple early on in my podcast featured it. And part of the reason they featured it was they gave me this, they asked me to sign a contract that they could use my artwork, my podcast artwork in their ads. And I've had so many people tell me, like, I listened to your podcast just because I saw the artwork and it stood out on Apple Podcasts. And so, yeah, I'm not subtle. I'm profoundly not subtle. But I'm also the opposite of that. And so the third thing that I wanted to tell you was just like, as profound as your faults might be, your strengths are just as profound. And your faults basically are an Aldi mirror. Never forget that. They're not what they seem. All right. I got one little last thing to say. Okay. Has anybody here seen the documentary Smallville? I don't know if has anybody seen that? It's about a boy. He's an alien with superpowers. His name's Clark Kent. It might not be a documentary. I don't know. But okay. It's just about Superman when he's a kid. Okay. It was on the WB before it was the CW. It's a simpler time. And, if you watch this show and you watch Clark Kent as a kid, you see like everything about him that makes him super at the start is a huge problem. He's breaking stuff all the time with his super strength. He's getting in trouble by using his X-ray vision in the wrong settings. Like he is so self-conscious about who he is and why he's different. But he has an alien dad show up as a prism and be like, this is who you are. And that's huge because the difference between Smallville Clark Kent, who's kind of a bumbling idiot that gets into all these problems and all these troubles, the difference between him and super universe saving Superman isn't powers. Like Clark Kent in Smallville doesn't fly. I don't know if he ever flies. He might fly at the end. That's the only reason I watched that show, is like, idiot, you can fly, dear God. Like, and I think they knew that. That's why they didn't do it until like the last possible second. Cause they're like, I think they'll keep watching if we're waiting for him to fly. And, but the thing is Clark Kent could fly the whole damn time. The difference between Clark Kent, high school Clark Kent, who's like a super farmer, and universe saving Superman isn't powers. It's self-awareness. Now he didn't have to work for that. He had his alien dad show up and be like, this is who you are. You're super powerful. You're awesome. You're better than these people. Do it. And I think we all wish that we had a alien dad, right? And I imagine, like, you know, what it would be like for an alien just to pop out of the ether, out of a wormhole, and just kind of, you know, maybe they have a device and they're like, yo, I've got an alien device and I'm going to tell you, I'm going to give it to you. And I'm going to tell you 3 things about this. So listen closely. The first thing that you need to know about this device is that this device is unique in all of the universe. There is no other device just like this. And inside of this device, the second thing I got to tell you is this device contains the known universe's most complex inner machinery. Nothing boggles scientists' minds like the thing inside of this. And the third thing I'm going to tell you is what this thing is for. But then before he can tell you what it's for, another evil alien, because you can tell he's got evil eyes, pops out of the wormhole and just kills the alien before he can tell you, number 3, what this thing is for. And if that happened to you, if you had this gift that was unique in all the universe and was the world's and the universe's most complex inner machinery, you would do whatever it took to find out that number 3. You would take that call so seriously to be like, what is this device for? So we all wish we had that alien dad show up out of nowhere. But like I said at the start, like, in a way, all of us had alien parents. And you don't have a device that is unique in all the universe and contains the world's most complex inner machinery. You are the device. So that I feel like all that stuff that I told you, all of these stories, they all point to the same thing, is that I I am on a mission to encourage people to take that third call so seriously and do whatever it takes to find out what this neurodiversity is for. Huge, a bunch of stories, a bunch of stuff, but I appreciate all of you guys letting me workshop some of those ideas because they're things that I've been kind of noodling on and working through for a long time. And I thought this might be a safe place to hash it out.
Andy, I think those are great messages for our entrepreneurs and innovators and folks on the call, because I wondered, why do creatives need a pep talk? Mm-hmm. That's the name of your podcast, right? So
yeah,
I think you just answered that because they sort of don't fit the mold.
100%. Actually, next week on my podcast, I have this Ivy League scholar who he wrote the book Excellent Sheep. I think it's a best-selling book, but his new book is called The Death of the Artist, and it's really interesting and fascinating. It's kind of depressing in a way, actually, but one of the things in the book, he interviewed hundreds of artists. I was one of the artists that he interviewed, and he said the thing that he found was artists that survive are the ones that are just incredibly resilient because, and I'm not saying I'm a weak emo boy, but I do think that is the case, is that there, as soon as you're a kid and you're like, I think I'm an artist, most people around you are like, oh no, not an artist. Like that's going to be terrible. And so you have to, from the earliest age, be your own, pep talker and coach, because it's pretty much everything in our society is kind of dissuading you from continuing to create stuff.
I have a little story about that with my own kids, because I can see how we breed that out of kids. When my son was 5 years old, we were painting birdhouses for Christmas presents. And we had some green paint, and we had some white paint. And I was doing like all green, all white. And he started mixing the green and white together. And I was like, oh, you're mixing the paints, like green paint and white paint. And what it ended up looking like was birdhouses made of marble, and they're gorgeous.
Cool.
So I see in my own story that we try to sort of, water down what is special, mm-hmm. and put rules in place where they shouldn't exist.
Yeah. And I didn't want to get into all this. It's not really my thing, but I've heard Seth Godin talk about this, and, our whole system is built for the Industrial Revolution. Our schools are built like a factory line, and we're the interchangeable parts. We're treated in a way like spark plugs and part of that is they're going to be interchangeable parts. We have to bet on the most average qualities of people, because we have to think, okay, when this one breaks down from depression or divorce or whatever it is, we can just yank that person off the line and put another replaceable human on that line. And I think there's tons of, I didn't have a terrible school experience really. But I do think things are changing, because almost all of those replaceable jobs are, being automated. And so I think that it is a time where people, it's more and more, I think, are going to try to find what is different about their brain and be all about that. Yeah.
Good morning, Andy.
Hi, how's it going, Ruth?
I'm doing excellent. It's good to see you today. I know you can't see me, but that's for your benefit.
It's early. Yeah.
So I just wanted to comment. I enjoyed your talk, number one.
Thanks.
Number two, as a parent of neurodiverse children and myself, I've never thought of myself as neurodiverse, because of course that's a new term, mm-hmm. but I can be considered that as well. And just knowing how to deal with your situation, how to still make it. That's one thing that I really promote amongst my children. Like, it doesn't matter what your so-called disability is. It's what your ability is that really matters. But your so-called disabilities can also be used to your advantage. Not that they should be discounted, but they're not the be all and end all. So they shouldn't stop you from achieving in life. And
Yeah.
so one of the things that I did from early on is I became a homeschooler. So I've homeschooled my children straight throughout. One is in college right now. And because I always felt like I don't want them to be in a box. I don't want them to feel as though they have to do things the way everybody does. And even so, I still struggle sometimes when I see them doing certain things. I'm like, oh my gosh, why are you doing it that way? And then I catch myself and I'm like, it's okay. It doesn't matter. Like, so if you see math pages for one of my children, it's like a whole storybook with characters coming out of the numbers and just some stuff that you're like, what in the world? Like, can I see the math problems? It's just like funny, but I have embraced the fact that they're all different and giving them that space to express their difference while they're in a safe learning environment is really key. And I'm glad that you were able to find your way, because I do believe that even though people talk about excuse me, everybody being different and whatever, but there's so much of a push for everyone to be the same.
Yeah.
And I've seen that over and over, and especially with 2020 in today's climate, it's like, oh, you're stupid if you believe this. You're stupid if you believe that. Each side is telling you you're stupid because you're doing it that way or this way. And no one is like, you know what? It's okay if you see it differently. You have a right to think differently. No, there's more of like, you have to think my way or you have to think that way.
Yeah.
So this was a really great presentation. I never heard anyone talking about this in this manner, and it's really refreshing actually. So thank you so much. I appreciate you.
I really appreciate that. And I don't know if this is going to be accurate for you, but I once talked about in a talk how math was hard for me because all of the numbers seem to have personalities. And I always thought, oh, that's just me being goofy and being like, oh man, 5 is such a moron. And 7's where it's at. Like they're all arguing and having all this drama. And then someone told me at some point that that's actually a very bizarre, obscure form of synesthesia, where you're associating personalities with numbers. And so even just stuff like that, I don't think I went into this, but this idea of Joseph Campbell said the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. And I think, the cave you fear to enter is your shadow side. It's the stuff about you that you think is broken or wrong or whatever. And I feel like if I had even explained, I probably not back in the early 90s would they have known that that was a form of synesthesia or some kind of learning ability or disability. But I think now more than ever, if you will confront those things of like, let me just admit that all my numbers on the times table sheet are having an argument, and it's making it very hard to meet get the time test. That maybe if that would happen, you could get some help, or you could, recognize what was special about that.
Andy, I have my 17-year-old daughter here listening,
Yeah.
and she's an artist as well. And she's like, oh my gosh, yeah, all the numbers have personalities.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've met very few people, and I've talked about it on the podcast, and I'll get like like 1 or 2 messages of like, my kid says that. And we're like, yeah, it's very distracting. It's weird because it's almost like avoiding drama to like, I literally, if someone asks me a question and the answer is a number, it really stresses me out, including, how old are your kids? And I'm like, whoa, oh man, the numbers are always changing. I can't keep track of it. You're about to judge me for being a bad father because I avoid numbers, including my kids' ages. If you really want to know their age, I can work on that. But every time, and I have a buddy, the guy who actually made that light, who's like more of an engineer type thinker. And he'll come up into this space and be like, square footage is this? And I'm like, good God, man, not this early with the numbers. Dear Lord. You can just feel like he's having a great time talking about them, but they stress me out. Yeah.
Andy, I want to ask you just a little bit about the business side of your world, because we're the Chamber of Commerce and we have to do that. You obviously are gifted illustrator, designer, and you're working with really outstanding national brands. but you've also seemed to have monetized your podcast and you're doing public speaking and this book. So I just kind of want to dig into how did that come about, and how do you feel about that, and how do you manage that side?
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Interrupting. I told you that earlier. That was a problem. Yeah. So, interestingly enough, that's a great segue because, for the longest time, starting out my career, I really tried to minimize any of the business stuff completely and really not think about money. And I just, I wanted to do as little of that as possible because I was convinced, and I think it's the general understanding that business is about numbers, is primarily about numbers. And I actually don't think that's true at all. I think that, sometimes I'll do a workshop of some kind, a career workshop, and I'll get a note like, when are you going to talk about business? And I'm like, what do you mean business? And they're like, taxes and invoicing. And I'm like, okay, that's admin and accounting. Those are parts of business. Most businesses outsource those things, by the way, or hire them out. Real business to me is much more about strategy, marketing, branding, the product, value, blah, 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 all that stuff. And all that stuff, actually, what ended up happening, when I was in Columbus, Indiana, I really kind of hit rock bottom in the recession, and we were struggling, and I ended up having to get a job at the youth shelter there. And it was hard because I'd already published a book. I'd already worked with Sony and all kinds of clients already. And so I was at kind of rock bottom, and I remember like some people's rock bottom is like turn into drugs, and I turned to something darker than that, which is business books. And I thought, oh, this is so gross. I'm reading marketing magazines. And that's when I started getting into podcasting. It was like early podcasting days. But what ended up happening was I'd read these magazines, and they'd have cover stories on these people that were celebrated as like unicorns in the business world, of like, look at this one in a lifetime. And I was like, I know 85 people that went to my high school like that. They're all artists. They're all creative people. These people that you think are 1 in a million in business, they're everywhere. Your tests just aren't the right metal detector. They're not calibrated to find these people and develop them and all that stuff. And so I think that in that season, I really dove headfirst into business. I think I spent a season where I was really, really, really obsessed with marketing and business and all that stuff. And I'm really glad I did that. And then I think, over the past couple of years, I've kind of switched gears as kind of money. I'm lucky and blessed and privileged to say money isn't as much of a, hot issue for me right now. I kind of chilled out on that a little bit and got back into, the pendulum swung more into the creative work and poetry and art and that kind of, being a sad artist guy, crying in his bathtub, that kind of thing. But I do, businesses, I highly recommend artists, don't be afraid of business. You being afraid of business is the prime reason that people like musicians get taken advantage of, as they say, oh, we'll worry about that. You don't worry about that. We'll throw you your 3%. Like, what? Why are they getting 3%? If you weren't afraid of business, you'd read that contract, you'd jump in there, you'd actually improve the marketing, you'd improve, your whole career and your ecosystem of all that. And so, yeah, business is a huge deal for me. And I love good business.
Do you know what kind of followership you have, or how many people listen to your podcast?
Yeah, I do. I pay attention. And, I'm actually, I just did a big episode about not being afraid of feedback. I'm a huge, as scary as it is for artists to get feedback. And I get why that is, because we're sensitive and fragile. I get that. But I feel like it actually inflates the ego when you separate. The ego is separation. You run away from people. It's going to get bigger, not smaller. And I think there's a humility of humiliating yourself in front of people and hitting rock bottom of like, getting good is partially about admitting how bad you are, coming to terms with it, taking the blindfold off and be like, this is where I am. I suck right now. And that's where I'm way off the bullseye, and this is how much I need to go. Anyway, that's a whole other thing, but we follow the numbers. I try. It's not super good for my mental health to be obsessed with that. But we get anywhere from, we're kind of a medium-sized podcast. We get anywhere from 25 to 35,000 people listen to an episode. And, I'm happy with that. I feel pretty good about it. And it's been great. Like, unlike YouTube where you can get millions of followers, millions of views, and it's really difficult to monetize that. And it usually doesn't equal kind of true fans. Podcasts are so much more of a niche, intimate medium that group of people, though, we don't have wild fluctuations in numbers. That group of people listens every week and we have a really intimate relationship.
And your advertisers have a sense of who they're connecting with.
Yeah, 100%. And that's the other thing about podcasts is that we actually will probably be starting a podcast network in the new year for like niche creative podcasts. And we've just learned that even if you don't have millions of people listening, if you have a very segmented, like targeted audience, people like Adobe and Skillshare and all those people, the people they want to talk to are listening to my podcast and they know that. I've done tests with the right advertisers and they get such good results that, they end up booking us out for sponsorship for a year at a time or, whatever. That works really well to align with the right partners and kind of know who these people are and all that kind of stuff.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
What about the book?
So that book, it's funny, that book, because the Creative Pep Talk book, I have a few different books. I've kind of, that's been a part of my practice for a long time.
Can you describe it for people? It's beautiful.
Yeah. The Creative Pep Talk book?
Yes.
Yeah. So Creative Pep Talk, it's funny because that book actually, I pitched it before the podcast existed and it was called that's where the name came from, Creative Pep Talk. And so in a way, it's not a one for one of the podcast. It's really more about other artists. And it's 50 pieces of lettering art that are basically pep talks to creative people. And then those artists, people like Stefan Sagmeister and Aaron Draplin and Jessica Hish wrote just a little blurb about the piece that they made. And I kind of think of it like, you just open it randomly and see what kind of message you get that day. I'm kind of woo like that, but yeah, that's kind of what it is.
So we're going to lose some folks at 9:00 and I want you to address the question of where did the name Andy J Pizza come from?
Yeah, it's actually kind of a tragedy. Because that's not true. So Andy J Pizza comes from, my name's Andy J Miller and it used to be, I used to go by that but it really made my brand really messy because, my website, like when I go to my gym here in town, I live in Westerville, right above Columbus, Ohio. And when I go to the gym in this little town and they're like, what's your name when you're signing in? I'm like, Andrew Miller. And I'm like, whoa, we've got 85 of those. And you're like, in this town, like not 85 really, but yeah. And so, the only website I could get was andy-j-miller.com, which is just a mouthful and it's like, dash, is that a hyphen or what? It's really annoying. And then, at Twitter, I was different than Instagram and all that stuff. So then like maybe 5 years ago, they came out with all these new suffixes for websites. So you could, instead of just getting .com, you could get all these different things, .brand, whatever. And one of them is .pizza. And I just thought, I actually am genuine. Like pizza is an actual problem for me. I like pizza too much. I think people like, okay, you have people that don't like pizza, evil people. Then you have people that are like, oh yeah, pizza's fine. It's a little heavy, whatever. And then you have people that are like, pizza? Oh, you're into pizza? Like, how many days straight have you only eaten pizza? In college, I don't want to tell you, but it was lots. And I genuinely love pizza. So I thought, all right, I'll just make my website andyj.pizza because it's funny and, whatever. But then at that same time is kind of when my podcast was taking off and everybody just assumed that was my name. And so everyone was like, Andy J Pizza. And so I just went with it. That was it. But the funny thing is, at that same time, the tragic thing is that's when I started dieting a lot and kind of getting my health in a better place. And so the time that I've been known as Andy J Pizza, I've eaten less pizza than I ever have in my entire life. And I'll go do a talk and they'll be like, we got you 40 Papa John's pizzas. And I'm like, oh man, no, I'm trying to lay off the slices. So yeah, that's the name.
Andy, we would love to keep talking to you. This has been so much fun and so meaningful. So much great content. I really appreciate it. I want you to see that you're getting a lot of love in the chat.
Oh, that's nice.
Folks who really enjoyed hearing from you, and Kaylee Lynn, who says she heard you talk about ADHD on your podcast and she finally got diagnosed. It's just been huge to have that validated. So thank you for sharing that, Kaylee. Just lots of love from folks.
I appreciate it.
Today. So
Hey, and can you all hear me? It's
Matt Rose.
Andy, can you hear me?
Yeah, buddy.
Hey, if I might say something out loud while we're still online, I am so proud of who you are and who you've become. But like sitting at the table at Denny's at 3 a.m, drinking coffee, talking about what are we gonna do? You just spit your water.
Yeah.
Like what I see on my screen is not surprising to me at all. That's like who was always there. So yeah, so proud of who you've become. You are literally exactly who you were back then. And yeah, it's just a thrill to see you thriving.
I really appreciate that, man. Love you, buddy. I have changed one thing. I'm not smoking packs of cigarettes like I was at Denny's, but
Good.
But I really appreciate it. I'm so glad you're here too, man. Matt Rust is a good man and a great printer. Yeah, I appreciate it, buddy. Good to hear from you.
That's a good note to end on. Listen, thank you all. We'll be back here next week to talk to Laura Musil. I hope you'll join us. Take care. Thank you, Andy. Thanks again. Thanks to Ryan for his help.